Okay. Regarding Ukraine, so let's talk
Mm,
about this Financial Times article, right? That it
yeah.
says inside Donald Trump's plan for the world.
Mm.
It says a lot of things in there. First of all, what's your general impression about this article? How reliable you think of the things in there said?
Right. Well, I'm going to say this. I have inside knowledge about this. Somebody who is or claims to be close to the Trump campaign actually
Mhm.
contacted me some months ago, and this person said to me, "This isn't Donald Trump's plan." In fact, Donald Trump was presented with this plan by some of the people who work for him, and he looked at it and he put it aside, but that he's got actually quite different ideas, which are not really as detailed, but are more about trying to find some means to take the tension out of the relationship with Russia. So I think that is probably true because when you actually read the Financial Times article very carefully, it's about the same plan that we learnt about back in August, early September,
Mhm.
which was presented to Trump at that time. There was no word that Trump himself had adopted it at that time. And if you read the Financial Times article carefully, it doesn't say that he's adopted it now. It's just a plan that some people have come up with. Now, the plan itself is unworkable. I mean, the
Mhm.
Russians won't accept it, the Ukrainians won't accept it, the Europeans can't implement it.
Mhm.
So it's an idea that's been put together by some people in Trump's entourage, very hawkish,
Mhm.
neocon inclined people. And basically, I think it's a mechanism to try to keep the war going rather than anything else. But I don't think that Trump himself is really very interested in it or is going to feel tied down to it in any way.
So we still don't know what Trump's plan really is, right? Even though he
No.
said that 24 hours he could end the war, but we don't know what he has in mind. No.
Well, I can tell you straight away what he has in mind, which is nothing. I don't think he has a plan. I think anybody who thinks that Donald Trump has a plan is deceiving themselves. I mean, Trump doesn't want the United States. I think this is genuine. He
Hmm.
doesn't want the United States drawn into a war in Ukraine.
Hmm.
He is also somebody who feels that the whole Ukraine thing was a terribly mismanaged affair,
Hmm.
which isn't profitable for the United States, at least not any longer. I mean, he is somebody who tends to look at everything in a very profit and loss sort of way. I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
but I don't think he's got any serious ideas or plans about how to end the Ukraine war. And when has he ever come up with any kind of plan of that kind?
Now, how about the Middle East? That article
Mm,
also said that Trump believed he could pressure Netanyahu to come to the table to come to some kind of a consensus with the other parties. There's
yeah,
Hezbollah, and then of course the Lebanon, all sort of people in different factions,
yeah.
different parties in Middle East. Do you think he could do that? Do you even think he wants to do that?
No, I don't. I'm not convinced. Actually, I mean, again, where Trump is concerned, I mean, he's clearly going to be very conflicted. I mean, his instinctive feelings are not only very strongly pro-Israeli, but he has a long-term, very close friendship with Netanyahu.
Hmm.
He's also recently spoken to Netanyahu. I can't really see him putting pressure on Netanyahu in the way that the article seems to suggest. Probably he thinks that because they're friends, Netanyahu will listen to him. What I think is true is that Trump doesn't want a war with Iran. And JD Vance, his vice president, has just said that. And that is going to create tensions within the Trump administration, if we ever have a second Trump administration. It's not happened yet. But if we ever do, there are going to be internal tensions on how to deal with the situation in the Middle East. There's going to be internal tensions about how to deal with the situation in Ukraine. It is a mistake to think that Trump has plans to solve either of these problems or that he has the political clarity to do what must be done in order to bring them to an end.
I feel about Trump too. I think he has some good ideas, and he probably can estimate, assess the situation better than Harris and Biden. But I'm not sure he can do the right thing. And he himself actually recently he had this long interview with Joe Rogan, like 3 hours. He admitted that. He said his biggest mistake is he hired some really bad people into his administration. I think he referred to, I mean, what I think a horrible person like a John Bolton, right, Pompeo, that kind of people. But I don't know whether that's what he's referring to. But in any event, I'm not confident that he will this time, do things differently. That's my concern.
No, I don't think any of us is. The one thing I would say about that, and that, by the way, I thought was the most important thing that Trump said across that entire interview, is that it is very unusual in any country in the West now for a politician to admit a mistake.
Yeah.
And he did admit a mistake, an important one. That may suggest that he's going to be a little bit more, careful who he chooses this time. Certainly, he does seem to have a stronger team this time than the one he did in 2016, which was, just put it mildly, we didn't want barely a team at all, actually.
Yeah. Well, speaking of election, there are already cases has been reported, like ballot boxes being burned down. Right. It's already chaos is already broke because they have this early voting thing. So their voting is going on right now. And so does seems confusions, and in some cases, maybe even, I don't know, sabotage is going on. So are we going to have a smooth election?
Well, I don't think so. And I mean, the rhetoric now is completely out of control. I mean, the Democrat, I mean, again, I mean, it's astonishing that people are talking this way after 2 assassination attempts on Trump. But again, we're hearing about how he's, a fascist. I mean, it's now been straightforwardly said that he's a fascist, that he's a threat to democracy, that he's a threat to America. I mean, when rhetoric reaches these kind of levels, then it becomes almost a matter of honor to rig the election, to try to stop Trump being elected, and if that doesn't work, even to kill him. I mean, it's I think people underestimate how dangerous this sort of rhetoric actually is.
Yeah, I agree. I also feel like it's very hateful, and I recently had a wedding to attend the last weekend. I mean, the people there, I know they're very pro Harris and Biden people, so I keep my mouth shut, even though I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not, but in some people's view, even you supported Jill Stein, the third party, they hate you for that because you are helping Trump when you do that. That's how they interpret that. So, I mean, in my case, if I'm not voting third party, I'm not voting for Harris either. So it's not like I'm helping Trump. So
I know.
Anyway, yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
One more thing is Jeff Bezos recently got lots of heat because supposedly he blocked a editorial board to endorse from endorsing Harris. So I have two questions about that. First of all, why is this such a big deal? I mean, of course, a billionaire owns a news outlet. That's nothing new. He's not the only one. And if you own it, of course, you have influence over it. And I didn't see they totally, everybody was shocked by like the Twitter file or Facebook even admitted, Zuckerberg admitted that the U.S. government, the FBI told them directly, what you can or cannot do. You have to get rid of some of the accounts, and you cannot publish this and that story. Nobody was reacting this way just because he apparently interfered. So why is this such a big deal? Just because they don't like him not to endorse Harris? Is that what it is?
Because it's seen again as helping Donald Trump. It comes back to the point that you've just made. Anything that appears that works to try to stop Donald Trump is not only permitted but encouraged. It's supported. Anything that might conceivably help Donald Trump is by definition wrong and illegitimate. I mean, that's the kind of mindset that now prevails today. So, if Zuckerberg does something which ultimately is supportive of the Democrats, of Harris or Biden, or that kind of thing, well, that's fine, because these are good, respectable, democratic people. They support our way and our thinking and all of that. If, on the other hand, Bezos comes along and he's worried that, the Washington Post is losing credibility, which it is, by the way, and losing readers, which it also is, and it's becoming a major drain on his resources, which it is also, and decides, well, I've got to do something to bring that to a stop, and that means not endorsing Harris and perhaps being prepared to have some more conservative people come on board. Shock, horror, that's betrayal. That's the end of the world. That just proves that, Bezos is a fascist as well. There are, today, by the way, the media here in London, which is effectively an outpost of the American media and this kind of thing. Even more so, it's able to say things that the American media still doesn't quite say. Anyway, it's now basically saying that all the plutocrats and oligarchs are now lining up behind Trump. And that's a further proof of what a dangerous fascist Trump ultimately is.
Yeah. I also feel like this whole thing about endorsement. I actually think now, personally, I don't like Jeff Bezos at all. I mean, there's all kinds of awful things he's done. I can't, stomach. But on this matter, I think not to endorse anybody. I actually think it's the correct thing to do, because newspaper, I always have a problem. Newspaper editorial board, they would endorse this and that candidate. What they essentially telling us is we, the readers, should listen to them and vote the way they want us to vote. Isn't the newspaper's purpose is to tell us what happened and let us to decide who we want to vote for?
I completely agree with you. I find the whole idea of endorsing candidates by newspapers an absurd one. It didn't used to exist when I was first started reading newspapers. I remember I lived through elections in Britain going all the way back to the one in 1970. So, I mean, in those days, newspapers did not endorse candidates. Now they do that as a matter of routine. I'm talking about Britain. I mean, in the United States, it might have been different. But I agree. I mean, newspapers, their purpose was to report the news, to inform. You would have commentary. You would have the editorial. And then you would have the op-ed, in which more often than not, you would choose somebody, a commentator, who would argue against the editorial. That was how the old system worked. And I thought it was a good one. But all that's gone out of the way now. Now, of course, because it's the future of democracy that's at stake, we have to all take sides. And newspapers must do so, and so must their owners. And if they take the wrong sides, then they must be thrown into the outer darkness.
And that's the conversation I had with one of the, my friend. I was like, no, I don't like Jeff Bezos. And then, what he's doing clearly is interfering with, newspapers, its own standing, what have you. But why would anybody endorse, right? The editorial board. My friend's argument is, well, they have been doing that for years. That is a long tradition, blah, blah. But I said, well, long tradition is probably the wrong tradition. We should change that.
Correct. And coming back to Jeff Bezos, I should say straight away, I don't like him either. He has done far more things that are far, far worse than not endorsing Kamala Harris. I mean, it's quite extraordinary that, as I say, people who up to now have been completely uncritical of Bezos, even as he's done things to his workers, which, one really shouldn't do. Suddenly they discover that, he's a terrible man and an oligarch and all of that kind of thing, simply because he won't allow the Washington Post to pass an editorial saying that Kamala Harris is the person we should all vote for. I mean, it tells you an awful lot about the warped nature of political debate in the West today.
Yeah. And speaking of, you're mentioning the British newspaper saying all these oligarchies are lining up behind the Trump. I recently made an episode to my Chinese audience to map out who is behind which candidate. Kamala Harris has a lot of billionaires behind her. I would say pretty much the whole Silicon Valley high-tech executive, they were all behind her, except the so-called PayPal mafia, the Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and then David Sachs. These are the so-called PayPal mafia. Now these are the people behind Trump, but the rest of them, they were all behind Kamala. And
Yeah.
then my viewers, some of my viewers pointed out that the PayPal mafia actually are very anti-China. And the
Yeah.
reason they're anti-China is because they were trying to get into the Chinese market. They couldn't. So that's just something I want to share with you. I find
Well,
interesting.
that is very interesting, and that explains a great deal, actually.
Yeah, yeah. Because I told you I was complaining that David Sachs, has been I feel he has been anti-China. Now Elon Musk himself probably is not because he has
No.
still business in China.
Yeah.
But Peter Thiel I think is also very anti-China. David Sachs
Interesting.
is. Yeah, yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah.
Well, that explains a great deal, of course. And Peter Thiel has this connection with JD Vance, which was
Uh-huh.
also very interesting. Yeah. Well, that although that is very, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I learned that from my audience that they were,
Mm.
and then I looked it
Mm.
up. It's true that they were trying
Mm.
pretty hard to get into China, but couldn't.
Mm.
Now, China in general, anything related to financial services, PayPal is regarded a kind of a financial services. They're very, very careful and they have
Yeah.
stricter regulation. Although I
The,
think, yeah, although I
the,
think that they are loosening up a little bit now, I think. So,
they're absolutely right to be very, very careful, if I may say. A friend of mine who was a banker said that, banks and financial institutions from outside can act as black holes inside your economy. I mean,
without even you
things
notice, many times you don't
without
even notice.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
I mean, this person was Russian, and
Hmm.
the difficulty the Russians have had bringing their financial system under control, um, since which they've only really started to do after 2014, have been enormous. And there's a lot of comments and criticisms that you sometimes find made even in Russia by all sorts of sovereigntist people of Nabulina, the
Hmm.
chair of the central bank. But one of the things they all overlook is that she has done incredible work, very, very hard work, bringing, as I said, the financial system in Russia under control. And that included closing down something like 2/3 of the country's banks.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And that's, I mean, it explains that China is always very careful. And
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
criticism. Lots of the Western bankers against China is
Mm,
because China is
mhm.
too strict in this area. So they couldn't
Yeah,
easily go in
yeah,
and grab all the
yeah,
money. And,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's part of the people.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Um, all right. I think that's all I have. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. So it's always interesting talking to you. Yeah.
And a pleasure to speak to you again. And and we'll be speaking hopefully from China next week, or
Yeah.
you'll be in China
Next week.
next week.
Yeah. I'll speak.
So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to that too.
Me too.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
week, Sophia.
You too. Bye.
Bye.